Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello guys, my name is Mir Fariana. Here I want to explain about the novel that I choose in book report subject. The novel that I choose is entitled Pride and Prejudice. The writer is Jane Austen and the first published in 28 January in 1813. The genre of this novel is classic romance. This is a book cover from this novel. And then next is content of the book or novel. Here I will briefly mention the characters, conflict, and mood or tone. The characters is Mr. Darcy, Elizabeth, Mr. Bingley, Jane, Mary, Catherine, Lydia, Mr. Wickham, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. The conflict of this novel is between love affair between Darcy and Lizzie, who initially dislike each other. The romance between Lizzie, who always puts bad prejudice on Darcy, and Darcy, who always prioritizes his pride. The mood or tone is the story told in this novel tends to be light. The plot that is delivered also does not confuse the reader. The language used is a bit classic and heavy, but the stories are told lightly. The author tells the characters firmly and straightforwardly. And next is the genre of this novel is romance and family drama. This book intended for adult because the language from this novel is a little bit classic and heavy, so I don't recommend this for kids or young people, but I recommended this for adult. This book tells about family drama and also romance between the doctors. Here I mention a proof from the novel, the proof that show about the condition of Bennet's family, and the proof that show how was the love line between Darcy and Lizzie. As you can see guys. And then setting. Setting from this novel is in England, late 17th, early 18th, including Brighton, London, and the counties of Hertfordshire, Derbyshire, and Kent, England. As in this first picture, second picture, and third picture, I mentioned all of the settings including. And then is characteristics of main characters. The characteristic of Mr. Darcy is tend to be stiff, firm, and seems arrogant and haughty. Elizabeth or Lizzie, she's have a cheerful characters among her sisters, passionate about knowledge, and determined. She doesn't care what other people think of her. And Mr. Bingley seems friendly, easy to accept in a new environment as a loyal and royal young man. And then Jane, shy woman but also friendly and always has positive thoughts. And then Lydia is the last daughter in Bennet family, but she has a stubborn and unruly character. She has a character like Mrs. Bennet, who likes gossip and socialize and is busy with men's affairs and appearance. Mr. Bennet, although his attitude looks cold, but Mr. Bennet is a father figure who is sympathetic to his wife and daughters. Mrs. Bennet, a mother with effusive characters, always puts the pride of the family in order to always to be seen as good by others. She was filled with the desire to marry of her daughters, to men from prominent families. And the last is Mr. Wickham. Mr. Wickham is a young man who has bad enough personality because he has success in inciting Lydia to elope. And the next is the plot. The plot of this novel depicts a complicated love story between Elizabeth and Darcy, and also tells the story of Bennet's family also. The arrival of Mr. Bingley and his sister and Darcy to a party and an area where Lizzie lives is the beginning from this story. In the party, Lizzie was a little interested in Darcy, but it seems Darcy didn't show interest in Lizzie. Then, an army troops came to the settlement of Lizzie to set up the camp, and one of the soldiers named Wickham, like Lizzie. After that, Lydia escaped with Wickham and married secretly. After Lydia escapes with Wickham and marries secretly, Lizzie and Darcy misunderstanding. Lizzie thinks Darcy has helped Lydia and Wickham to elope. After Darcy's explanation of Lizzie's misunderstanding of him, Lizzie forgives and tries to understand Darcy. After the dispute between Darcy and Lizzie is resolved, they can finally accept each other, and Darcy decides to marry Lizzie. So it was the end of the explanation, guys, and I will tell the positive and negative sides from this novel. First is the positive sides in this novel. Due to the use of classic language in this novel, it allows me to read this novel at the same time to learn unfamiliar or rarely heard words, and it adds to my insight or knowledge for new words. Like I mentioned before, this novel is used classic and high likely language from this novel, so I can learn a new words that I never heard before. So that is the positive sides from this novel. While for the negative sides or shortcomings of the likeness of this novel, for ordinary people who don't really like literature, it will be very boring to read this book because this book is only filled with writing, no illustrations, and also the use of classic words that can confuse the reader. So the using of classic language can be positive sides or the negative sides. It's depending to who the reader is it. And then I highly recommended this novel for those of you guys who like classic stories with stories that are light and easy to understand, especially for lovers of romance novel. It will be lacking if you have not read this masterpiece from Jane Austen. And for beginners, this novel can also be used as a medium for learning and enhancing vocabulary. Very fun, isn't it? We can entertain ourselves while learning. This novel also released a film version, the story of which is also based on this novel and is not much different. If you are interested in watching the film first, I also recommended it. And that's all my brief explanation about this Pride and Prejudice novel. I hope it's pleasing and can make all my friends, all of you, interested in reading this novel. Okay, thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.